So I ask everybody to go ahead and take your seats, please. And we'll get the fourth meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Appropriations and Revenue underway. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Boswell.
Here.
Senator Deneen. Here. Senator Douglas.
Present.
Senator Funky Fromeyer. Senator Givens. Senator Mays Bledsoe. Senator Neal. Senator Nemus.
Present.
Senator Webb. Representative Banta.
Present.
Representative Bentley. Representative Bowling.
Here. I got you.
Representative Bray.
Present.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Dietz.
Here.
Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Flannery. Representative Fleming.
Present.
Representative Fraser Gordon.
Yes, ma'am.
Representative Freeland.
Present.
Representative Fugit.
Here.
Representative Gentry. Here. Representative Hart.
Here.
Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative McPherson.
Here.
Representative Palumbo.
Here.
Representative Raymond. Representative Riley. Representative Stevenson. Representative Upchurch.
Here.
Representative Co-Chair McDaniel.
Here.
Co-Chair Petrie.
Here.
All right, very well. Having a quorum and duly constituted to conduct business, we'll proceed. First item is approval of minutes from the August 21st meeting. Do I have a motion? By
Second.
Senator Boswell, second by Representative Freeland. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Very well. Okay, next up, we're going to deal with funding and outcomes for veterinary and optometry students. Betsy, if you come on up.
Thank you for inviting me to come today and talk about these optometry and veterinary programs. My name is Becky Gilpatrick. I'm Director of Student Aid at KIA. So I'd like to start by talking about the optometry program first. To give you a little context here, as far as the history of the program, we being Kentucky, started an optometry program in 1974. It was a contract spaces program at that time. And those contract spaces programs run through the Southern Regional Education Board. And the way that generally works is that we contract through SREB for a specific number of seats, and then there are participating institutions connected to that, and then SREB negotiates the contract rate, and then we pay that rate out, and to SREB, they distribute it onto the schools. But it holds those seats for our students for that contract amount. So we had 4 participating institutions, and those are the schools that are listed there. And then in 2018, there was a study. House Bill 200 was actually the biennial budget bill for that year. And so in the budget language, it called for a work group to be put together to study the effects of transforming that into a forgivable loan program, and then to also study the return of optometry graduates to Kentucky to practice medicine. That particular work group was headed by the Council on Post-Secondary Education. KIA was not involved with the program at that time, so that all ran through CPE. So just in looking at the study itself, these were the recommendations that came out of it. And basically they ended up deciding, the work group, that the service requirement was not needed at that time because they felt like there was a high enough rate of return of people actually coming back to Kentucky to practice medicine. There were a couple of different things regarding the funding for the program. Primarily at that particular time in Kentucky, there were some, the general fund was under a bit of strain because that's when we were looking for money to shore up the state pension system. There was also some budget cuts going on at the public institutions, so they want to look at the funding model for those contract seats because that amount kept increasing each year. So that was the budgetary part of it. And then eventually they recommended that that be changed from a contract program to a scholarship model and for the administration to be transferred to KIA. And it's shifted the award structure on that so that we would have a committee actually select the scholarship recipients. And last but not least, there was a Kentucky College of Optometry opened its doors in 2016, and the work group wanted to recognize the role that that school would play, expecting that there would be a favorable return to Kentucky with that school being located in Kentucky. And so there is language in the program to dedicate 1/3 of the funding to that school. And so what we have now is an optometry scholarship program. I've given you the KRS there at the top if you're interested in that. Kia entered the scene here with fiscal year 2021. We actually paid out the last year the contract spaces from CPE because that money was put in our budget. And then we got the scholarship program up and running. So the optometry contract students that were already in the program, we kept them grandfathered in so they continued forward, because with the contract spaces, that is actually a commitment that we have made to fund that student for all the years of that contract program. And so that's a 4-year program for to go through that optometry school. And so for those students who were in year 2, year 3, or year 4, we had to continue to pay that out. We couldn't just drop them off while they were already in school. So what we did is we set that rate to be a fixed rate for those students at the rate that they were for that 2021 year, and we just continued them forward at that rate. The actual first scholarship, the students actually that applied and were selected for the scholarship, they began their enrollment in the fall of 21. So we will have the first graduating class of pure scholarship recipients this upcoming spring. So it takes 4 years for all of that to happen. So we're coming up on that with the program. As I mentioned, there is 1/3 of the appropriation that goes to Kentucky College of Optometry. The committee that selects those is actually established through the statutory language. There is a representative from the Kentucky Optometric Association that sits on that committee. There's also a representative from the Kentucky College of Optometry. And we have 2 at-large members that come from the optometry professional community. They're practicing optometrists. And then there's also 1 representative from one of the non-Kentucky institutions. And so because we have 3 non-Kentucky institutions, we rotate that slot around every 2 years to each of the institutions so they have a fair say in what's happening with the scholarship selection. This slide shows kind of where we are as far as the way the students have worked out with what we've paid over the years and with the award amounts. So as you can see there, the OCS grandfather, that's your contract students that were already in the program, and that number has been declining as those students have graduated and left the contract spaces program. And of course the optometry scholarship numbers have increased as we've actually replaced those students and entered new classes of purely optometry students. So for this fiscal year, you'll see we are at 56 students who are all scholarship recipients. So we are now fully implemented in with not making any payments connected to the contract spaces program students any longer, and having these all be scholarship recipients. Now with the award amounts, it's a little bit more complicated because of some of the things we've had to do to make the money work out. As I mentioned, the contract spaces students were grandfathered. That amount was $19,200. However, the Indiana University School of Optometry, they only charged us $12,536, and that was the difference between their in-state and out-of-state tuition. So we kept them at that amount. They were fine with that, and so that was just the amount that those students continued to receive. When the scholarship recipients came in, they received the actual scholarship amount that was a little above that, and it helped go to other costs of education, such as their materials, their books, their living expenses. The first year of the optometry scholarship, the committee, we all agreed that $14,500 was a reasonable scholarship amount, so that's where we started the program. The next year there was enough funding available that we increased that to $15,000. And then we ran into a situation with the funding and being able to meet the 1/3 ratio for Kentucky College of Optometry. So we actually came back and increased for students that had entered those first 2 years under the scholarship program. We bumped those amounts up for those students to make the dollars actually work out to meet the statutory requirement. And so that's kind of why you have the 2 asterisks behind the optometry scholarship dollars all this time. But at that far column, you can see the total amount that we've dispersed since Kia has entered the program. The next few slides provide information by institution as to what the institutions have actually provided to us, to Kia, regarding the scholarships. So we have listed there for each of these fiscal years the number of scholarships that were awarded. And it's important to note that when it was the contract spaces program, the institutions selected the students. It was a number of seats by institution, and they selected the students based on their admission, criteria. When it became a scholarship program, that all changed. Now the scholarship follows the student. So the student has the choice as to where they take the scholarship within the 4 schools, because we've kept the same 4 schools as far as participating institutions. So this is kind of how this has worked out. So for this year, we have 24 students who are scholarship recipients who have chosen to go to Kentucky College of Optometry. So that's how to read this. For the enrollment counts, this is what the college has provided to us as far as the total number of students that they have who are claiming Kentucky as their state of residence, and the total they have enrolled overall for all states. And for the graduate count, it's the same way. That's out of that count of Kentucky residents, as well as their overall counts for the graduate totals. The practicing in Kentucky, that is either practicing or doing residency, because there is a 1-year residency requirement after they complete that Doctor of Optometry degree program at the college. So that number looks low. However, this is the status of the students at the time of graduation. And so there are some of them, this is all coming from a study that the Kentucky College of Optometry does. It's actually a survey that their staff conduct the week of commencement. So this is information that they've pulled in. So this is at that particular time what these graduates know as far as where they're going to practice or where they're going to do their residency. So some of them will go to residencies out of state. That still means they could come back to Kentucky at some point in the future. That's a possibility. And then there's also some that really don't know where they're going yet. They haven't received an offer of employment, or they don't know, quite what their immediate plans are going to be. So that's why this is just what we know at the time of graduation. And then we also included some information on average student loan debt, just to give you an idea of how much, even though we're paying scholarship dollars, this is how much they're walking out of school actually having to repay. And then I've listed the tuition rate there for each of the colleges, and it's at the bottom of the screen. That is only tuition. The full cost of attendance will be much higher for these students. So for instance, a first-year student entering Kentucky College of Optometry, you're looking at total cost of education, which would include their housing, their food supplies, different things like that, transportation, insurance. That cost is actually closer to $69,000. That's an estimate off the college's website. For a 4th-year student, that cost per year is closer to $80,000. So there's quite a bit more to the cost beyond just the tuition rate. This is how those stats look for Indiana University's College of Optometry. And so with practicing in Kentucky, where we have the unknowns or the not availables, that's where the college did not have information that they could not share. There was not a mechanism in place for them to actually gather the information about who practices from Kentucky. Some of these schools use anonymous surveys that happen after the fact, and so the students may feel it may or may not provide that information, and there's nothing really to connect them back to say, oh, this is the student that was or was not from Kentucky. This is Southern College of Optometry. And again, what information was provided is exactly what I've shared with you on these screens as those schools have given it to us. Southern is in Memphis, Tennessee, for those of you that might not know where that's located. And then this is University of Alabama, Birmingham, and they have had very small participation with us, but they are a very good optometry school. But this is the information that they've had as far as the students, the counts, head counts, and the data. And this is my last slide on the optometry portion of the presentation. And so this gives you an idea of where our optometric coverage is in Kentucky. The counties that are highlighted are those that have no optometric coverage whatsoever. The Kentucky Optometric Board of Examiners provided some data to us that says that there are currently 912 optometrists that are licensed in Kentucky. 718 of those folks have a primary practice in Kentucky, and out of that number, 309 of them have at least one branch that's in another location in Kentucky, so multiple locations that they're working out of. But these counties in yellow, there are 21 of them in total. They do not have any optometrists located with a practice in their particular county.
Ms. Kilpatrick, I'm going to stop you for
Sure.
a second. Well, I'd like to, if the committee has optometric-related questions, I'd like to start with that, then we'll do veterinary in a second. I want to start by going back to the results of the study from House Bill 200 in 2018. Mm-hmm. And one of the working group recommendations there about imposing a service requirement was not required based on the high percentage who are licensed to practice in Kentucky and the pipeline of optometrists from the Kentucky College of Optometry. But when I go over to that slide, I'm not seeing a very high percentage actually returning to the Commonwealth. And I know you say it's just the first year after, but we're looking at 36%, 2018, 27 returning to practice.
So at the time of this, that the study was actually, the work group was put together in 2018, that was based on the information they had at the time. So I think it was anticipated that there would be, you know, a significant presence, a lot of optometry students coming through that Kentucky College of Optometry because it was a new school for us. But that's all that's in the study there. And so it's just, this is just the information as it has played out now that we are, you know, 6 years down the road.
So we're really not seeing the fruits of what the work group was led to believe back then necessarily bear out, is what it appears from this.
I can't weigh into that.
Okay. I think that was all I had. I saw, was it Senator Webb? I'm sorry, I apologize. Representative Johnson was on there first. Oh, he was pointing to Senator Webb. Even better.
What a gentleman. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just ask, following up on the chairman's question and the reality of optometrists not returning here, are there factors that we should be considering as policymakers on how to better incent them to do that? And do you think that, I'd be interested in the breakdown of corporate practice, and I think this is pertaining to veterinarians too later on, corporate practice versus private practice, and how the student debt load and the opportunity to start up costs with capital is a factor, and maybe, but the corporate private thing is really something that's emerging in professions, and I'd be interested to see that breakdown, whether they're working for Walmart or a national company, or being able to go to these areas that are underserved. My dad served an underserved area for 50 years, and so I know a little bit about that. And then when he was trying to recruit somebody to take the practice over, they were competing with corporate nationals that were located in more urban areas.
We can dig into that. We didn't have that level of detail as to where those practices were, but given some time, we can dig further into that to see how that actually pans out.
Yeah. Senator Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at the slide that you have up there right now, we talk about no ophthalmologists in certain, no optometrists in certain areas. Does that also follow that there are no ophthalmologists in those areas either, or is there a differentiation?
There is a differentiation. My understanding is that ophthalmologists require more education. That's a medical degree.
No.
Okay.
I got that. I'm an
Okay.
anesthesiologist. What I'm asking is, when you take a look at the data, we get data on where there are no optometrists. Do we also ask whether there are ophthalmologists in those particular optometrist barren areas as well?
So we did not ask for the data on the ophthalmologists.
Okay.
So all I can say is this is what was provided on licensure for optometrists.
Okay. Thank you.
Very well. Senator Boswell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I want to return to the part about the scholarship program. It says here that the committee selects the scholarship awardees. Can you tell me a little bit about the criteria? Is that subjective or simply based on grade point average? What are some of the criteria that's used in that committee selection?
There's a large number of things that are considered by the committee. So KIA has an application that we make available on our website, and it's up there if you want to look at it today. But there is an essay that they write, so there is, they take some of that into account. They do look at grade point average. We ask for the transcripts from the students for their undergrad, so they can go and look at what classwork they've taken and how they performed on that. They look at their entry test scores on some of those entry tests into optometry school, and so it's kind of a wide criteria of things.
So is it fair to say that that this is a fair selection process and not necessarily based on gender or any other thing other than, because it sounds like to me there does seem to be some subjectivity there in that program.
Yeah. KIA actually hides the personally identifiable information, so the committee members wouldn't know who a particular student is. They really don't even know which college they're choosing, because we ask them to put on the application where their preferences are, where they may go. So that's kind of hidden from the committee as well. They would not know gender. I don't think we even ask that kind of information on the application.
Thank you. And could I have just one short?
Yes.
So when you talk about the average loan and debt of a student that comes out, does that also consider maybe somebody who's planned their entire life to send their child to school, not a child now becoming an adult? Does that include the people that don't have any debt when they come out? So there are some people that don't have debt.
I think that number is of the students who have debt.
Who have debt.
That is the average debt level.
Thank you.
All right, very well. We're going to jump on over into veterinary.
Okay. So just like we started with the optometry program, I want to give you a little history on the veterinary program. We started out as a veterinary contract spaces program in 1951. And again, that was a partnership through the Southern Regional Education Board. That was also, we worked with Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine. So they are still our partner with veterinary contract spaces. So this now makes 74 years that we have had a good partnership with them. Up until 2020 in that session, the contract spaces program, the funding only appeared for that in the budget language. There was no other statutory language that actually outlined anything regarding to the veterinary contract spaces program. Also, prior to that FY21, the program was administered through the Council on Post-Secondary Education. So I'm trying to stick with the information that primarily I know since KIA came into the picture. But what we currently have is that we are funding, Kentucky is funding 164 contract seats each year, and that's at 2 institutions. We give the bulk of those seats to Auburn University. They admit 38 students from Kentucky each year to Auburn, and we have 12 seats that are awarded to Tuskegee University's College of Medicine, and that ends up being 3 per class that they can offer. KIA verifies Kentucky residence for those students, and then we communicate that information to the institutions. The institutions are still selecting the students that they want to award, that they want to actually offer seats to at their college. And like the optometry program, when it was contract spaces, SREB sets that contract rate each year. For the for the veterinary program, the benefits of the contract spaces are for just 8 semesters, which is the equivalent of 4 years. I would note, though, that the Auburn program, it actually takes 9 semesters for them to complete that program. And so the Kentucky students are considered in-state students for that purpose, and they receive those in-state tuition benefits for that extra semester, even though we aren't paying the contract spaces amount to Auburn. There was similar language in the House Bill 200 back in 2018 that kind of took the same approach to veterinary contract spaces as it did the optometry program, wanting a work group to look at a forgivable loan approach, and to look at, in particular, the number of graduates returning to Kentucky to practice large animal medicine, because there is a shortage of large animal veterinarians. There was at that time, and there still exists a shortage today. So part of those recommendations that came out of that work group, they decided there that we had a pretty decent return of those graduates coming back to Kentucky, and so they thought that the forgivable program really was not necessary at that point. They did encourage us to continue participating, purchasing the contract spaces through Auburn and through Tuskegee, given the relationship at that time with those institutions. And there was concerns there again about the funding for the situation, or for the contract spaces, and so they felt there was a priority to maintain 164 seats, that we wanted to keep that up. But they also wanted to explore strategies for providing lower cost loans to those veterinary students in case there was not enough general fund support for the students. So I would add that I told you that the Kentucky is considered an in-state tuition rate for those students, to give you an idea of what the difference would be on that. So for this academic year, the 24-25 year, at the Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine, the in-state tuition rate, and this is just tuition, not full cost of attendance, but the in-state tuition rate is $31,000, $31,974 actually, so almost $32,000. For out-of-state students, that's $54,000. So there is a nice gap there that our students are saving just because we're paying the difference through the contract program. For Tuskegee, that is a private college that's there in Alabama. Those students, the tuition rate is the same for in-state and out-of-state, but that's $45,492 for everybody tuition at Tuskegee. So it is a little more affordable to actually go to Auburn than it is Tuskegee. This is a look at what the program activity has been for the last 4 years, and then of course I've given you the numbers for this fiscal year and the next year as far as the way the appropriation works out. The request for this presentation was to look at the number of first-year students entering the program, so that is what is listed on this. But there is the total number of recipients that we've paid each year on that. Some things to note about this is that even though we have 164 seats that we offer and we contract for each year, those numbers are falling below that mark. There's a lot of reasons for that. Every now and then we will have a student that will need to sit out a semester or a year for various reasons, and they'll come back, they'll enter, they'll exit the program, or it could be that, you know, we've had a student drop out along the way, but because it's a 4-year program, we're kind of tied into, for instance, 38 students are admitted from Kentucky each year at Auburn. So if we have a student who drops out in their 3rd year, they can't just add another student to that class because they are actually extending offers for just that 38. So it kind of, the numbers play out over a 4-year lifespan for those students. For this year, I have the amount there that was appropriated and then the amount to fully fund. Now, there's a difference between those amounts, but I will also let you know that because we have unpaid seats in the prior years, there is continuing fund language for KIA in the budget, and we have rolled those funds forward, so we have enough continuing funding appropriation that we can pay all 164 seats. So the funds are there, even though that's not new dollars appropriated, it's just continuing from the prior year. This is a look at the contract space, the veterinary graduates returning to Kentucky. All of this data comes from Auburn University. We requested the same data from Tuskegee University. All we received back from them was 1 graduate from Kentucky in 2022. So they do not have a lot of success tracking the actual graduates. And again, this uses, for the veterinary schools, they use a senior survey that's conducted at the time that they graduate, and that's the American Veterinary Medical Association does that senior survey. It's all anonymous, so that makes it very difficult for the veterinary schools to know the students, identify the students who are from Kentucky that are coming back to Kentucky to practice. So, but this is the information that Auburn was able to present to us. So the employment numbers are for the graduates from Kentucky that knew they were employed at the time of graduation, and then for those that were actually knew they were going to be employed in Kentucky. And so that percentage there rolls off of those last two columns before that, as far as the percentage of students who knew they were going to graduate and work in Kentucky. So, and that comes up to about a 67% rate of return. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that there are a number of things that these students could move on to after receiving their Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. For example, they may decide to continue their education and go into a specialty area. That could be 4 or 5 or even more years afterwards. And they could return to Kentucky at that point in time, and we would not know because we've lost them at that point. This is just the connection with the college itself and who's provided the data at that time that they've left the college. You know, they could also be taking a break and going into the military. There are all kinds of things that could be happening with the graduates. So that's 67%, 68% that we know at the time of graduation are actually coming back immediately to start work. But there are others in that count that we do not know what happened to them over the long term. So for this last graduating class, the survey data usually comes out in September, so we did not have that data in time to include it for this presentation, but that should be coming across just any time now. This is a look. Also, this information is provided by the Auburn University, and this gives examples of what salaries look like for the different types of veterinary practices, and what average student loan debts look like at the time of graduation. And this is like the optometry for those that have the debt at the time, practicing for those. So for the animal practices, for this 2023, which was the most recent year that was available, you can see the large animal veterinarians are generally making around $130,000. Equine, they're $125,000, and then you have your mixed and your small animals, and what they would generally make a year. And then, of course, for Kentucky graduates, because we're able to kind of discount them a little bit through the contract spaces program, the student loan debt, the blue areas, which are classified as